Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, I continue my series looking at the different factions for Starfleet battles by looking at the Romulans. Now, before I go into this look at the Romulans, I just want to make it clear. I am actually making all these characterizations based on the ships presented in the Captain Set SSD guidebook. The reason for this is I figure the ships that they put in the starter box are going to be a good sampling of what makes these given factions what they are. There are books later on that give different little options as the different factions experimented throughout the General War. But to me, what's in the core book is your sampling of the core identity of these factions. So with that said, sit back and relax as I talk about the Romulans. The first thing you notice when you look at the Romulan ships is, man, there aren't that many of them. There are literally presented to us 4 ships. Only the Orions and the Tholians have less ships presented in the Captain's Log SSD book than the Romulans. The second thing you notice is that the Romulan ships don't have much power to them. The Romulan Warbird, it has some armor, it has some hull, it has a grand total of 6 power, all coming from its impulse engines. It does not have an anti-proton reactor. It does not have a warp drive. That's right. The classic Warbird, as you remember from that wonderful episode, The Balance of Terror, is sublight only. It is not warp capable. And its sole weapon is a forward-firing plasma torpedo. It also has a cloaking device. As you look at the upgraded warship version, the warp-capable cruiser, the War Eagle, that one, hey, it has warp engines. Its warp engines provide 10 power. Every other faction's main warp nacelles provide 15 power. The War Eagle has 10 power from each of its nacelles. It has 6 impulse. And this one does not have an anti-proton reactor. So it has a total of 26 power. Its weaponry is a forward-firing plasma torpedo, 4 forward-firing Type 1 phasers, as in offensive phasers, 2 rear-firing and side arc covering Type 3 or defensive phasers. But it's got solid shields, especially on its sides. Not as strong on the front and rear, though. The K5r Frigate is almost their mainline ship. And its layout is very similar to a Klingon ship, because it was probably from the Klingons originally. Something to remember is that the Romulans and Klingons were allies at a point, and so some Klingon ships ended up in Romulan hands, and the Romulans retrofitted them. The K5r Frigate, its warp engines only give it 8 power each. But, like the other Klingon refit ship, the K5r Cruiser, it has a notable feature in that instead of having one anti-proton reactor, it has 2. One in the aft section, one in the forward section. Meaning, of course, it can get hit in one anti-proton reactor, and the other will keep going. It has 2 forward-firing plasma torpedoes, 2 forward-firing Type 1 phasers. Because it's a frigate. It's a small ship. And this is something to really start noticing. At this point, the Romulan ships are all small ships. The cruisers, the War Eagle and Warbird cruisers, they're not heavily armed. They're small ships. And then you get to the crown jewel of the Romulan fleet. Their big bruiser. The K5r Cruiser. K5r for Klingon refit. Meaning, this is probably based off a D7. Just based on the armaments it has alone. It has 3 forward-firing Type 1 phasers. It has 2 side and side rear firing Type 2 phasers. And then it has 2 forward-firing plasma torpedoes. And what makes these interesting is its warp engines provide 15 power each. Combine this with its impulse engines and its 2 points of anti-proton reactor rear, 1 point anti-proton reactor forward, and you're dealing with a whopping 37 power. Not a whole lot of power. The big thing to remember is that this is a ship that has a cloaking device. In fact, all the Romulan ships have cloaking devices. Now, where it gets kind of interesting is the K5r Cruiser is the only one of these ships that could, in theory, by its point value, be a match in a one-on-one fight against a Klingon D7 or a Federation heavy cruiser. The other ships, however, these tell us the most about how the Romulans fight. These other ships, generally speaking, for the War Eagle, you could have one of them and another ship like the Warbird, and that would be a match for a Federation heavy cruiser. The K5r, two of those can go up against, have the point value comparable to a Federation heavy cruiser. 3 Warbirds are a match for a Federation heavy cruiser if you go by points. Yeah. This tells you something. Romulans do not attack one-on-one. Half their fleet wants to have another of its type, or 2 of its type, with them, and 3/4 of the ships presented want to have another ship with them, at least one other ship, when they are fighting a Federation heavy cruiser. Which should tell you everything you need to know about how to run a Romulans. You're cloaking, you're decloaking to shoot, you're getting shot at the period that you are decloaked, you're recloaking, getting to a position to shoot again, and hoping you're not hit when you decloak to fire. And you are basically using every dirty trick you can. Or another way to put it is, Romulan ships are knife fighters in a galaxy of polearm wielders. You don't win by playing fair. You don't win by just charging up and getting speared. You win by lying in wait and pouncing from behind. And then running away again. And that's pretty much the best description I can come up with based on what I'm seeing for how to run Romulans. Next week, I'm going to talk about one of the more unusual twists in the Starfleet Battles universe, where they got permission from a gentleman called Larry Niven to put his race into the Starfleet Battles universe. Next week, we talk about the race that learned a very hard lesson about humanity. Next week, we talk about the Kzinti. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.